Hello again. Welcome back to our busy little shop. Today I have a real treat for you. Last week, this very pristine mid 68 to mid 69 Fender Super Reverb amp come in the shop. And man, this thing is clean. This is like time machine clean. Look at this. This thing is pristine. The story is, it was bought new, belongs to a longtime customer of mine. Surprisingly, I've never seen his amp before because he basically bought it. He's a minister. He put it in his church. It's been used regularly since it walked in the door. And it has never had a thing done to it. He called me and said, well, his amp quit working. He brought it in. I checked it out. And I've said in here a lot of times, I tell people all the time, the bad thing about really cool old amplifiers that are original are they are really cool old original amplifiers that usually need work. This guy needs a going over. What happened? His rectifier tube went out, and I got checking the rest of the amplifier out, and the filter caps are shot. We're talking about a 50-year-old amplifier that's never had a thing done to it. All the tubes are original, the fuse was original, everything. It's just been played. So we're going to rebuild the amplifier, and we're going to do some changes. These amplifiers have some problems that came in with the Silverface era that has a balance control instead of a bias. It has some other funky stuff going on. We'll get into that later. But we're into a full rebuild here. So it's going to look pristine on the outside, but it's going to be new on the inside. I say everything on this amp was dead original. The original output tubes were so worn out they were drawing about 13 milliamps apiece. Like I say, his rectifier tube looked like a lightning storm inside. And I think a lot of that had to do with, you know, the aging filter caps and so on. So let's get this torn down. It's going to be a long one. I plan on spending most of the day on this. Okay, well, we're in. We've got the basic disassembly here, so we'll go over a couple things really quick. You can see there's his original Mullard GZ34 rectifier tube that gave up the ghost. We've got two original RCA 6L6 GCs and a couple Telefunken tubes, and the rest of them's RCAs. We will be checking out these preamp tubes. If they are in good condition, gains up on them, they're not noisy, we're going to retain those because they just sound better. So anyway, looking over here, we've got his original blown fuse. You can see we've had a little bit of leakage from the filter caps here. But you can see everything here is all original. I also heard some thermal noise while I got this amplifier running earlier. I'm going to guess that the noise I heard was actually these noisy power supply resistors, these 2-watt carbon comps. There was a little bit of popping going on in the background that's usually associated with them. They're going to go anyway. Along with, there ought to be two in here. Yes, the voltage divider resistors for the main power supply capacitor stack. Okay, getting over here to the other side, we'll talk about a few things. First thing I'm going to do with this amplifier is clean up the chassis a little bit. These amplifiers usually are coated with a very irritating corrosion. It burns your nose, it burns your throat, it burns your eyes, makes your nose run, makes you sneeze. That has to be cleaned up before I can even start working on it, or it's going to be a miserable day. Getting over here, we have the aforementioned balance bias supply. This is going to get nuked. We're going to put a blackface style bias control in it. Something else is going to go. Down here we have a few things that also gave the Silverface amps a bad name. We've got these big power resistors here that was actually used to bias the 6L6s into a very hot Class A. Then what they did, they forced it into Class AB by applying negative grid bias. So instead of these just being grounded to the chassis, like the blackface amps were, we've got a little stuff going on here that needs to be changed. These are going to go. Something else, because their lead dresses were a little messy and their grounding wasn't as good in the later amps, they also put these grid suppression caps on. And the idea behind those were the amplifier actually had oscillation problems. So they put these on the output tubes to mask the oscillation problems. They're still there, it just rolls them off the audio frequency so you can't hear them. That's going to go too. These actually really destroy the tone of a Fender amp. Part of the problem, we have that oscillation problem, is our brass grounding plate up here. Sole connection to ground is pressure through all the pots and so on being bolted to it and the jacks. And then all your grounds are connected to that plate. The plate has to physically connect well to the chassis to get the ground to the chassis. So one of the things I always do on a Fender when I'm cleaning up these chassis is you got to pull this plate out, take all the knobs, all the switches, everything off the front, pull this plate, scrub it up to where it's shiny again and not corroded. The plate and the chassis surface itself that it mates to, so that you've got a good clean ground there and there's no resistance between this ground plate and the chassis. Between that and the bad lead dresses, we can get rid of the oscillations that they were covering up. Down here they did some other funny stuff. The plate load resistors here for the phase inverter were reduced to reduce the gain of the phase inverter. This one was actually an earlier one because they didn't change these two resistors here also. A lot of times they change this whole thing here as well. And then last but not least, we're going to replace his 2-wire AC cable with a properly grounded cable. We're going to do an entire chassis check. All the ground's going to be tightened up, everything's going to be done well. Some of these ground leads, instead of connecting to a lug here tied to the transformer mounting bolts, will probably get soldered directly to the chassis, along with a couple solder joints here on this plate to the chassis to also reinforce that ground connection. So there we go. So while we're here, we're going to be replacing all the electrolytic capacitors in the front and the end of the amp. Probably most of the plate load resistors, because again, these, we're going to check these. If they're drifted, these are a huge source of noise problems too, so they're probably going to go. So there we go. Let's get this thing cleaned up and get working on it before I start sneezing. Well, that's certainly looking different. We've got all of our pots and jacks loose in the front here, and you can actually see where this is oxidized. The bottom's worse. The chassis got the same oxidation on it. We're going to get this all cleaned up. Also, a lot of our pots, like the mid-range and stuff, was grounded, or the mid-range or the bass controls were grounded through this plate also. So step one is getting this cleaned up, getting our ground secure there, and then moving on. Okay, here you can see how I've cleaned the ground panel and the chassis behind it. It was scrubbed with Scotch-Brite, vacuumed out, and then wiped with alcohol. We're clean. So let's get this part of it back together. We're also going to be making sure that our lock washers and all that are clean so our grounds connect well. Well, we have our front panel back together. Everything there is all nice, clean, neat, and tidy. We're going to leave the leads the way they are for the time being because we're going to be doing a massive lead dress in the front of this amp later. But that's one of the last stages. So we'll get to that after a while. Right now we're going to turn our attention to this back panel because it's going to get the same treatment. We've got lots of loose switches. We're going to clean all these connectors down here. The chassis is going to be cleaned up really well for the grounds for the output jacks, and all the grounds up here for the reverb and tremolo switching and all that. In fact, the reverb circuit drive is actually grounded right there to the chassis. So that's going to be all cleaned up as well. Now that most of our light housekeeping has been completed, we're going to actually get started with the rebuild here. And a perfect place to start is with the bias board. So what we're going to do is replace the power supply cap for the bias. We're going to change this 1K resistor back to 470 like it was in the black faces. We're going to upgrade this diode. Then we're going to rewire the bias control itself and get it ready to connect to the board over here properly. All that's going to happen in stages. We're going to do a lot of this over here first and catch up with this later. Anyway, we're going to start here. When we're talking about a black face, everybody talks about the black face mods. Everybody knows what a black face is. But very few people know what a red face mod is. Well, let me tell you, a red face mod is an improperly done blackface conversion that still has oscillations and other problems in it that actually makes the owner angry or the technician angry or embarrassed, resulting in the red face. So there you go. We're trying to avoid that. That is why we want to do it right. So here we go. Bias board's all done. We've converted our bias control. So let's flip this over and get the filter caps done. Power supply caps are done. Let's move on to the power amp. Well, we're about 3 hours in here at this point. We have our power amp taken care of. We have our power supply taken care of. We have new output tubes, new rectifier tube. We have new circuitry here around the tube sockets because all the resistors there were off value. We've got our phase inverter corrected back to the black face circuit. We've corrected a couple other things here. We had a bad solder joint up here. And this resistor right here, which is on your feedback circuit to stabilize the amp, had been hot and drifted in value, which is an indication there of an oscillation problem. I'm very curious over here that we seem to have a cathode resistor over here. It's been hot for one of the preamp tubes. See which one that is. That is actually the tremolo tube. Find that quite interesting. have to check into that. Anyway, we've got the whole front end here to take care of. We're going to be changing most of these, well, all of these electrolytic caps up here. Kind of curious to see what they read. The power supply caps were way off spec. Some of them were high, some of them were low. So I'm going to clean up my little mess here a little bit and take a little break, straighten my back out, and get back at this. Alright. About another hour in here. We've replaced the plate load resistors, the cathode resistors, and the cathode bypass capacitors all through here. That's all taken care of. So any problems that may show up now are unexpected, but I bet this will take care of a huge amount of them. So we've got the tubes back in it. We're warming up, and we're going to start checking stuff out here and start finalizing this repair. We still have our lead dress to do. Of course, have to have the amp pretty much finished to do that. And the only other main thing I really have to do is replace the AC cable. And I do want to put a couple solder joints on this ground plane here. Okay, we have our front end lead dress done now. We ran into a little bit of a problem here. When I was checking out the vibrato channel, the mid-range control did not work at all. And the bass was very, very erratic. As it turns out, the bass control had a 66 ohm short in it. So I took the control apart, never did find anything in it, cleaned it all up, put it all back together, and it's fine now, but that was kind of weird. Anyway, so just no those surprises ran into. Alright, we're winding down the pike here. We've cleaned the tube sockets, checked all that for noise and everything. So we're all good there. All we have to do left now is put our power cord on. We have our new heavy gauge 12-foot AC cable. It's been grounded properly on the inside of the chassis. So I mentioned that the one cathode bypass resistor for the tremolo had been hot and it drifted, and I wondered why. Well, here's why. We found out that this was a capacitor for it. The other capacitors like this were actually a different brand, and they drifted high. They were about 10 microfarads, well, 15 microfarads higher than they were supposed to be. But this little guy, this is 2-section caps. I'm going to show you both sections. Okay, they're supposed to be 25 microfarads. I got a 0.1 here. I have a 0.3 there. Okay, that could explain why our resistors got hot. So anyway, moving on. Then we turned our attention over to this side. We cleaned the cabinet up, cleaned the inside of it out, tightened the speakers up. There's about 5 cranks on each speaker bolt loose there. Tightened up the screws to the baffle. Checked the reverb tank. The tank was okay, but we had to actually replace 3 out of 4 of the ends on the cables. So we've got that all taken care of. So we're ready to bolt this little guy up. So the last thing I have to do is clean up the foot switch and make sure it all works. So I was going to check it, and guess what? It doesn't work. These switches will not move. Okay. Here we go. Okay, we pulled that one out. Luckily, all we had to do is really clean the switches. They were just gommed up. I don't think they've ever been used. So, here's our little pile of debris. And here's another thing. Just like the switch, when you think you have everything taken care of, it throws you a curve. Sorry. That corrosion is starting to get to me. Anyway, we had a bad reverb drive tube from the original tubes. We had to replace it. It's only one of the original preamp tubes we had to replace. We had to fix that. But something cool I found here while I was cleaning out the amplifier. This was in it. So how cool is that? Actually, funny thing, now that I look at it, all those amplifiers on this owner's manual is blackface. So anyway, very cool stuff though. Just another sign of the times. I wonder if there's a date on this. Nope. Nope, no dates. Okay. So anyway, there we go. There's a warranty. Well, and there we have it. An early, mid 68, 69 Super Reverb rebuilt, back to blackface specs. Few safety things taken care of here and there. We're going to let it run for a day. Make sure no other little surprises pop up. Then we'll let it get home. So I hope you enjoyed this. Just give you a little idea of what it takes to rebuild one of these. So until next time, play nice.